Well, welcome everybody. I'm Alex Goff with Goff Rugby Report, and this is our beginning of our series of 2021 Major League Rugby draft shows, and sort of standing alone on this one, but we're starting with the draft coming up in a few days. We have our final list of players who declared for the draft. 168 players have declared for the draft. It actually was up a little bit higher than that, but a couple of them removed their names, or had their names removed because we weren't sure. I'll tell you, though, it was interesting because I've been looking through, and you can't know everybody. So checking on a couple of players is one. I could not find any record that this player had played at all where he said he'd played, and that player got removed. So it's interesting. Maybe it was just a test player. Who knows? But we're ready to go into the draft. Now, a couple of things that I want players who think that they should be in the draft, players who aspire to be drafted, as you're watching the draft, here are a couple of things to pay attention to.
1.
Number one, you're not going to be drafted. Probably not. I mean, even if you've declared, we're talking about the people who've been declared, you've got about a 1 in 5 chance to be drafted. There are 36 draft spots, and there are 168 players who have been declared for the draft. The chances of you being drafted are very slim. It's about 21%, okay? So that's one thing about that. Is that a bad thing? I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing. Smart players understand that, first of all, the rules are you have to go through the draft process in order to sign with a Major League Rugby club. So if you're not someone who's drafted, you actually have, if you're a senior, graduating senior, you go through the draft, you're not drafted, you're now an undrafted free agent. If you can convince someone to be interested in you, you can sign with whoever you want. And for a lot of players, that may actually be the more attractive option. However, if you are drafted, there's a window that the team has to sign you, and they have to commit to sign you for a certain amount of time. They can't just really leave you hanging. So there are advantages to being drafted. There are advantages to not being drafted and going through the process, and still you have to just be careful. Know that if you are drafted, you have to commit to moving to that team. How that's enforced, I don't know.
2.
You have the 168 players who are declared for the draft. About 31 are foreign players. The rest are mostly U.S. Residents or citizens, and some are Canadian. And Canadian counts as local both for the Toronto Arrows in Canada and for the American teams as well. But visas are still a bit of an issue. Foreign players, however, there's a limit to the number of foreign players you can have on the team. It's not a particularly onerous limit, but it does exist. And there's the limit to the number of foreigners you can have in your roster. So every time a young, untried, untested player shows up who's a foreigner, they're taking a position away from a player who might be more proven, have more experience coming from overseas. That's something to watch, and we saw that last year, and that some very highly regarded players who were foreign didn't get drafted, even though it was expected they would get drafted. Many teams went for the U.S.-based player instead, and that's probably going to happen again this year.
3.
Number 3, there are a lot of highlight videos out there, and a lot of them are actually quite bad. And I'm not talking about, say, video resolution or, the quality. I mean, you see, obviously, some are like screen recorded off webcast, whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the kind of rugby these players are choosing to put on there. Number 1, sevens. What has sevens got to do with 15s? When you're talking about Major League Rugby, which is a very clogged field of play, a place where you're not going to see too many players get too many breaks and throw behind the back passes and have 3 guys with him and only 1 guy to beat. It's not going to happen all that often, right? So showing a lot of sevens and a lot of breakaway runs is useless. It got to feel nice. And on top of that, I mean, I see some just really weird things, weird choices by players, like you're a scrum half and we see just breakaways and runs. Well, where's your pass? Where's your pass when you're under pressure? Okay, where's your defense? Okay. Speaking of defense, we see very little defense. And I saw a couple of videos where they started with the players' defensive abilities. And I just love that, because that, more than anything, I think, is what pro teams are looking for. So, can somebody make a tackle? Can somebody just really front up and make tough tackles in traffic? We see a lot more offense, and I think that in the end, it's a little bit of unintentional showboating. And then the other thing that I think that is a bit of an issue with these highlight videos, and sometimes you can't control it, is the level of competition. If you are playing for a college team that is not in a high level of competition in its conference, then it's going to be very difficult to show that you're able to do something against good players or a group of good players. Just about every college team has one or two good players. But do they have 10, 15 good players? When you show somebody sidestepping, right, he's a wing and he's playing sevens and he sidesteps like three guys who are pretty much tight five forwards trying to play open field sevens. Big deal. Who cares? That doesn't really show you anything. And we are seeing some of that. Sometimes you can't control it, but sometimes you can, because it's also noticeable when a player, say, even when they're playing sevens, okay? Maybe you only have sevens this year, right? Maybe your recent stuff, it's only sevens. Fine. Show some defense, right? Show some ability in tight. But the other thing is, you can start to see who their opposition is. And if they keep choosing clips from games against weak opposition, and they never show clips from the game, say, their team lost against somebody really tough, like Life University or something like that, that's telling. 4. Getting drafted in certain positions is going to be very difficult. And the three positions that I kind of think of that are a problem are, first of all, lock if you're under 6'5". Really tough to break into a professional team being shorter than 6'5" as a lock forward, unless you're just super good at all the things that you need to do. Lineouts specifically, scrum specifically, balls specifically, defense, especially in tight, and hitting rucks, I guess. If we, again, going back to the previous point, if we see highlights of a lot of locks just running in open field, that's not going to be your game. That's not going to be what gets you onto the team. So height really helps, especially height and power helps in the lineout, in the scrum, in tight, mauls, defense, pillar defense. Number 2, fly half. It's like, who's going to take a flyer on a young fly half? I'd like to see it happen, and I'd like to see teams develop those players and nurture them and get them on the academy team, get them playing time, put them on the bench and get them in, for 5 or 10 minutes or something like that. But it's still very, very difficult. And if you look throughout the league, you'll see that a lot of fly half positions, more than scrum half, fly half positions are given to experienced players, often experienced players from overseas. And finally, number 8. Number 8 is a little bit kind of like fly half in that situation. Number 8 is often your best big man on the field. It's not always the case, but very often somebody who's just got that combination of size and power and speed and athleticism, all these things. That's what you want in your number 8. And are you going to give it to a young player? Are you going to give that time to a young player? It's a little bit scary to do that. Somebody has to be pretty fantastic to do that. So it's going to be very, very difficult if you declare yourself a number 8. Now, if you declare yourself a loose forward, if you declare yourself a number 8/lock and you're big enough, that's useful. Versatility is useful. But if you say, no, I'm a number 8, I think that's kind of a bad move. 5. All right, and finally, this is the draft order that we know about right now. There's been one trade that we know about. We're going to check and see if there are other trades. And we'll talk a little bit about who these teams might pick. But I think what was a big surprise to us all last year was the fact that I mean, we should have seen it. No foreigners or very few foreigners drafted. And the other thing was how many backs were drafted, especially in the first several picks. I think in the first 7, there were 5 backs picked. I really think that that's kind of nuts. And despite the fact that some of these players did very well, I think Connor Mooneyham, the number 1 pick, did quite well for himself. Although the Rookie of the Year, who in our show we kind of mentioned him, but we never quite got him into a pickup high, was Andrew Guerra. Did a terrific job. He's a forward. And a loose forward, a number 6, really good, right? Test him out, let him go. And I think that this year you're going to see a greater concentration of props and locks in the higher levels. And if we don't, we should have, because that's really the smart move. All right, everybody, thank you for watching. This is the opening salvo in our draft shows from Goff Rugby Report. And thanks a lot for our Patreon patrons and our supporters. And if you want to support what we do, please go to the link at the bottom, goffrugbyreport.com/support-GRR, and help us out. It really matters. As we get more and more audience, we actually have to pay more for hosting a greater bandwidth. So you can help us maintain our bandwidth. Thanks a lot.